Hey guys, tonight we're going to lie beneath the Persian stars in a quiet orchard just outside Shiraz, where a boy with ink on his fingertips once looked up through the branches and imagined the constellations as ripe and blooming things. The air is warm, still holding on to the perfume of sun-warmed figs, and the night is alive with the tiniest noises. The scratch of a beetle on bark, the soft flap of a cloth drying on a rooftop, a nightingale practicing scales. You won't need to memorize anything. You probably won't survive this air as drinking water. And that's fine. No tests, no quizzes. Just the gentle hum of an old story about a boy who looked at the heavens and didn't see fire or fate, but fruit. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air smells faintly of apricots, dust, and goat hair. You're 11, maybe 12, sitting cross-legged beneath a crooked fig tree at the edge of your family's orchard. The branches above are heavy with late summer fruit, their silhouettes dense and drooping against a lavender sky that's slowly giving itself over to night. It's just past sundown, and you've snuck out again with your wooden tablet and a stub of charcoal, the good kind your older cousin swiped from a spice trader who had a very distracted mule. You're here because something keeps calling you back. Not the figs, not the warm soil between your toes, but the slow blinking of the stars as they arrive, one by one, like shy guests at a party. You start to sketch. Not anything in particular, just dots and arcs and the vague sweep of Orion's belt, which your uncle insists is the spine of a dragon, though you've never seen a dragon in any of the illustrated Qurans. There's one star you always look for first, the small one near the tail of Pegasus. It twinkles in a way that feels peach-like, software, gentle. You don't know the Greek name for it, and frankly, you don't care. In your mind, it's Nakhod, little peach. Round, pale, a bit fuzzy in your imagination. You whisper it out loud. Nakhod. It feels right. And that's the beginning. Your family doesn't think much of your night wanderings. Your mother believes you're simply forgetful with bedtime, and your father suspects you're sneaking raisins from the drying baskets. You are, but only sometimes. You've always had this habit of giving things new names. You once renamed the neighbor's rooster after a soup your grandmother made, which caused a minor scandal during Ramadan. Your sister still hasn't forgiven you. But the stars don't seem to mind. One night, your uncle, the one with too many opinions and an enviable collection of vests, catches you outside. He squints at your drawings, squats beside you, and smacks a mosquito off his elbow. "What's this?" he asks, poking your chart with a walnut-stained finger. You point to your favorite star. Nakhod, you say. Little peach. He frowns. That's not what it's called. You shrug. It is to me. Later, he brings you a book. Well, a scroll, really, wrapped in a bit of linen and smelling faintly of rose oil and vinegar. It's full of celestial diagrams and notes, written in a hand so crabbed it looks like ants learning calligraphy. It belonged to a cousin of a friend of a scholar who might have known Al-Sufi, the great Persian astronomer from the previous century. This is your first true glimpse of astronomy. You don't understand most of it. The math, the Greek names, the corrections to Ptolemy's lists. But you understand the love behind it, the careful lines, the detailed notes, the reverence, The way someone once stayed up late just to describe what a star looked like when it blinked. You spend that whole winter pretending to help with almond pressing, while secretly copying star charts behind the barn. There's an old man in the neighborhood, a retired scholar who now mostly makes terrible flatbread and quotes the Quran at pigeons. One day, he sees your diagrams and squints for a long while before grunting, "That one looks like a fig seed." You light up. "Yes, I call it Anjir, fig star." He grunts again. "You're naming them after fruit?" You nod. "I don't know the Greek, but I know the fruit." He doesn't laugh. He just sits down beside you and starts muttering calculations in a way that suggests your astronomy lessons have begun, whether you agreed or not. Historians still debate whether this nameless teacher was an actual scholar or simply a man with excellent memory and too much time. Some think he may have been a pupil of Al-Biruni himself. Others suggest he was a retired baker who liked stars more than dough. But whoever he was, he becomes your guide. Grumpy, clever, and unexpectedly gentle. He tells you, grumbling, that stars don't taste like fruit. You tell him, "Not to you." And somehow, he keeps teaching you. Evenings become longer, nights quieter. The orchard remains your observatory. And slowly, the dots you once scattered like sesame seeds on paper begin to arrange themselves into soft, edible patterns. Peaches, plums, pomegranates. There's a strange joy in looking up and finding hunger and beauty braided together. One night, under a sky heavy with stars and fig-scented air, your teacher says, "You know they won't take you seriously with those names." You smile. "I know, but I remember them better this way." He doesn't say anything else. But the next week, you notice he's labeled a star as Zardalu in the margin of his notes. Apricot. It catches on. The stars come earlier now, or maybe you simply wait for them with more intention. It's spring, and the air has that clean sweetness it gets after a rare rain, when the desert briefly remembers how to bloom. You lie on the flat roof of your home, your legs dangling over the edge, listening to the slow conversations of pigeons and neighbors drifting through the evening air. Beside you is your new prize possession, a hand-me-down astrolabe, slightly dented, faintly green with age, but still dazzling in the right light. It was gifted, or more accurately, forgotten, by a distant cousin who studied in Isfahan and claimed to have met a man who once ate dates with Omar Khayyam. You suspect he made that up, but the astrolabe is real enough, its brass disc cool beneath your fingers as you trace the curves of the reet, the little moving web of stars. You've started recording things now, not just star positions, but impressions, feelings. You draw the lion constellation with a mane shaped like a pomegranate rind. You make notes beside the stars, not in Greek or Arabic, but in soft, round Farsi script that looks like it's been written with a brush soaked in honey. Beside Vega, you scribble, Shab Bozorg, Great Night. Near Altair, Tutsefid, White Mulberry. You're building a garden in the sky. Your father finds one of your charts. He stares at it for a long time and finally asks if it's poetry. You say yes, because it is. At the local madrasa, where you're sent to properly study astronomy and stop drawing figs with halos, things move more slowly. The teacher is stern, bearded, and terrifying in a way that makes you overheat just thinking about answering a question. He lectures from well-worn texts, citing the Almagest and praising the precision of the Greeks. He never once mentions fruit. But the boy beside you, Kamran, passes you a note one day during a long lecture about lunar parallax. It's a tiny sketch of a constellation you know well, labeled with one perfect word, Safarjal. Quince. You don't laugh, but you smile so hard your ink brush wobbles, and suddenly, you're not the only one. There is, in your notebooks, a strange harmony now. Greek names sit beside your own, Arabic annotations next to ink drawings of pear slices and jujubes. You're not trying to replace knowledge, just to nest something soft inside of it. Still, not everyone is delighted. One particular scholar, a tall, humorless man who once fell asleep during his own lecture on planetary spheres, declares your work whimsical nonsense. He says there is no place for fruit in science, that your notes are aesthetic clutter. You resist the urge to point out the grape-shaped ink stain on his robe. Instead, you keep drawing, and something peculiar begins to happen. Your fruit star names begin to travel. At first, it's small. A passing merchant asks if you know the name of the bright blue star near the summer triangle. You say, I call it Anjir. Figur. 2 weeks later, you hear a shepherd in the hills call it the same. You begin to wonder, are the stars yours, or are they something you're giving away? There's a story, half true, maybe less, about a Persian court astrologer who once predicted an eclipse using nothing but dates, both the fruit and the calendar. He placed them in rows on a plate and moved them around with a spoon, mumbling to himself and occasionally eating one. His prediction was off by 3 hours, but the king was too amused to care. You like that story. You believe it could be real. Historians today argue over the influence of folk astronomy on classical Persian science. Some say it muddied the waters. Others argue it kept the skies human, that naming a star after a pomegranate makes it easier to love than calling it Gamma Pegasi. You lean toward the latter. One evening, your teacher, the grumpy one who once mocked your peach, invites you to a rooftop gathering. You arrive nervously, unsure whether this is punishment or praise. He hands you a cup of cardamom tea and points to the western sky. Show them the orchard, he says. And you do. You trace the shapes with your finger, the constellations blooming one by one. There is the fig, you say. There, the sour cherry. The long one? That's dried apricot. They listen, these teachers and students and neighbors. They don't laugh. They watch the stars, and maybe, just for a moment, they see what you see. A garden strung across the heavens. You learn, slowly and sweetly, that sometimes the stars are more generous when you're not trying to measure them too precisely. Most of your nights are now spent on rooftops. Yours, Kamran's, the madrasas if the gatekeeper's in a good mood. With scrolls unfurled and fingers stained with berry juice, masquerading as ink. You've given up trying to keep your notes tidy. There's a kind of wisdom in their mess, as if the cosmos prefers a little smudging. Cameron's joined you nearly every night now, and so have others. A quiet girl who speaks in meter and counts constellations like stanzas. A boy who carves star names into tamarind seeds. You're not exactly a club, and certainly not a guild. more like a loose coalition of dreamy insurgents who think Saturn should be named after cinnamon bark. There's a particular evening that stays with you, the night of the frost-orange moon, when the air smells of wood smoke, and the wind carries the scent of sugar beet and wet clay. You're all gathered on Kamran's roof, huddled in wool shawls, breath fogging in little puffs. Above, the stars are so clear it feels like you could pluck them. You pass around a small scroll you've drafted, a star map, but with your own names replacing the classical ones, not entirely replacing, just resting beside them like an echo. Orion becomes the gardener, his belt now 3 dried limes. Cassiopeia is the apricot queen, her throne carved from almond wood. The others add their suggestions, soft as lullabies. One by one, the orchard in the sky grows. It's Kamran who wonders aloud if there are fruits we don't yet have on Earth, ones that only exist in the stars. You answer, of course, with conviction, star fruits. And that name sticks. You'll hear it again years later, spoken by a sailor who swears he saw a fruit-shaped constellation near the edge of the sea. Around this time, you begin keeping 2 journals. One is for the formal, respectable notes, planetary positions, eclipse tables, predictions made with serious ink and serious faces. You even bind it in dyed leather, just to make sure no one mistakes it for a daydream. The other is bound in linen, a pale saffron-colored cloth that smells faintly of your mother's spice drawer. That one holds the orchard, every fruit star, every poetic miscalculation, every night when you traced constellations with your breath on frosted glass. And yet, despite the dreaminess of your second journal, some of your playful ideas begin to find strange resonance in the real work. A star you once nicknamed Golnar, flower pomegranate, turns out to align precisely with a seasonal wind shift in spring. A pear-shaped constellation you invented purely for fun is later echoed in a merchant's chart from Samarkand, though they call it the teardrop instead. Are they copying you? Or are you all remembering something older together? There's a legend told by one of your elders, the kind who always seems to show up with a bowl of something warm and says things like, "In the time of the jinn," without irony, about a desert tribe who read the stars not for navigation, but for recipes. They believed that certain star patterns foretold the ripening of particular fruits. When the cluster now called the Pleiades rose before dawn, they said it meant the mulberries were ready to harvest. Historians today argue whether that was ever truly believed, or whether it was simply metaphor wrapped in memory. You think it hardly matters. Stars, like stories, don't need to be fact to be true. Still, the scholarly world you orbit in does not always agree. There's a growing resistance now, quiet but unmistakable. One of your senior mentors tells you kindly, in the way people warn children not to follow foxes into the woods, that you're drifting into mysticism. Another suggests you've spent too much time with poets and not enough with mathematicians. You nod. You smile. You don't stop. Because there's something quietly revolutionary in finding beauty in the margins, in seeing the fig where others only see Zeta Ophiuchi, in naming a comet after the smell of dried rose hips. One afternoon, you find a letter tucked between the pages of your notes. No seal, no signature, just a short message, written in painstaking calligraphy. Your orchard is blooming in cities you have never seen. You hold the letter to your chest for a long time before putting it in your linen-bound journal, right between black plum and star date. That night, you dream of a sky where every star glows faintly gold, each one a seed waiting to be planted. You don't sleep well, not because you're anxious, but because your head is full of ideas. You sit up in the dark, scratching out a new set of names, half in Persian, half in symbols you invent on the spot. One looks like a curled rind, another like the trail of a falling fig. You begin to wonder, what if this naming, this orchard, isn't just metaphor? What if the universe is waiting to be tasted? You smile at the absurdity, and then you write it down anyway, because you never know. The day you meet the vizier is a day that smells of dust, rosewater, and fresh ink. You're not summoned exactly. The invitation arrives folded inside a basket of quinces, each wrapped in silk. No message, no wax seal, just a single pressed star anise tucked among the fruit. You know immediately who it's from. Vizier Nasr al-Mulk is not the kind of man who signs letters. He signs policies, treaties, reforms. He signs his name in the margins of maps and in the quiet tremor of court protocol. But he does not sign letters. You bring the basket with you. It seems polite. The vizier's chamber is quiet and filtered through amber-colored screens, the kind that catch the light and turn it syrupy. The walls are lined not with books, but with scrolls stacked in latticed shelves. The ceiling is painted with an armillary sphere in faded indigo and lapis lazuli. It looks almost alive. Nasr al-Mulk is not what you expect. He's shorter, with eyes that glitter like someone who has never really slept. He's pouring tea from a samovar that appears to be older than the building, and he doesn't look up when you enter. "You gave Polaris the wrong name," he says. You freeze. You blink. You almost apologize. But then he looks up and smiles, and the sharpness softens. It was funny, but still wrong. You explain, softly, cautiously, that you didn't mean to rename anything officially, that the orchard map is more like a dreamscape than a navigational tool. He hands you a cup of tea. "I like dreamscapes," he says. You sit. The vizier asks questions, but not the kind you expect. Not about mathematics or accuracy. He asks what pear light looks like, whether a fruit-shaped constellation can ripen in reverse, whether the moon ever feels envious of the stars. You talk for hours, not all at once, just a long, unspooling kind of conversation, paused by fruit and tea, and the occasional visit from a humming scribe who glides in, listens briefly, and glides back out again. Eventually, Nasr al-Mulk leans back and says, "Would you like to help me build something?" You say yes without asking what. It turns out to be an observatory. The project is quiet, semi-official, part research outpost, part stargazer's retreat. And you, improbably, uncredentialed, and slightly ink-stained, are now its chief chart-keeper. Your orchard notebook becomes a blueprint, not for navigation or conquest, but for wonder. Under Nasr's blessing, you begin developing a new kind of celestial catalog, one where classical star positions are preserved, but each is paired with a sensory twin. Taste, scent, memory. The red giant Aldebaran becomes saffron smoke. The double star Algeba is renamed Split Fig. You leave the official names intact, of course. You're not a vandal, just an herbalist of the heavens. And so it begins. The observatory grows. You commission charts painted on silk, some lined in gold leaf, some stitched into prayer rugs. You create something you call the Taste Atlas, a strange hybrid between celestial navigation and perfumery. There are no rules, only suggestions. If you see this star near harvest time, serve pears soaked in rosewater. Or, when Scorpius reaches its zenith, read poems aloud with plum wine and crushed lavender. You start giving talks, quiet ones. You speak not in lecture halls, but in gardens, over cushions, beside slow fires. You show school children how to trace the pomegranate spiral, a star cluster that might only exist in your imagination, or in a secret chart from a Yemeni fisherman, depending on whom you believe. There's an evening when you catch Nasr al-Mulk, reading your orchard journal in the twilight. He doesn't notice you at first, just turns the pages slowly, with a faraway smile. "I think we've forgotten," he murmurs, "that the heavens were once described by cooks and poets, long before mathematicians had names for them." And you think, perhaps the greatest act of science is to remember the poetry we've tried to forget. But of course, not everyone is pleased. A delegation of scholars from another city arrives, wearing heavy robes and expressions even heavier. They tour the observatory, with the exact politeness one might show at a child's puppet show. When they see the Taste Atlas, one snorts and says, "Where's the entry for onion?" You offer a gentle smile. That would be Antares. They do not laugh. Nasr al-Mulk receives a letter, sealed in crimson wax and unusually heavy, the kind of letter that changes budgets. That same week, the vizier quietly steps back from the project. He doesn't say why. He doesn't need to. But you stay, because something has begun, something too lovely to undo. And somewhere out there, maybe over the copper domes of Shiraz or the quiet dunes of Khwarazm, a child is whispering the names of stars, shaped like melons and quince blossoms. You're no longer just an astronomer. You're a gardener of the sky, the first time someone sends you a letter addressed simply to the fruit namer of the stars. You laugh so hard you drop your ink pot. The title sticks. It turns up in scroll headers, in footnotes, even once in a merchant's gossip letter from Isfahan. Met the fruit namer. Not what I expected. Wears too much blue. You do wear too much blue. Indigo robes, cobalt sashes, a sky-dyed scarf that used to be a curtain. You like how the dye stains your fingers, makes it easier to feel like you belong to the sky. It's quiet at the observatory now, quieter than it was before the vizier stepped away. The staff is smaller. Just you, Cameron, 2 scribes who prefer to write in riddles, and an apprentice named Roya, who once tried to polish the moon dial with pomegranate juice. You spend most of your evenings on the upper platform, a place shaped like a crescent bowl, open to the stars. There's a curved bench where you often fall asleep, quill in hand, dreaming of constellations that smell like cardamom. One night, a traveler arrives. Not the usual kind. Not a scholar, not a patron, not even a merchant in search of a star-blessed trade route. He's older, wrapped in a cloak so patched it looks like it's made of bark, carries a walking stick carved with unfamiliar symbols. "I heard," he says, "that there's someone here who names stars after fruit." You nod, a little wary. He smiles. Good, because I've seen a cluster above the Red Sea that looks exactly like a breadfruit, and I need a second opinion. You invite him up. His name is Musa. He's a navigator from the Swahili coast, which sounds like something out of a dream. His eyes hold horizons you've never even imagined. He stays a week, sleeping in the garden, and teaching you songs that turn constellations into lullabies. He calls the star Al-Hina, the white fig, and tells you it's good luck if it rises when you're eating honey. You trade notes. You add 3 of his constellations to the taste atlas, after verifying them, of course, by looking at the sky upside down, the way he insists it must be viewed. Musa leaves behind a gift, a small chart painted on what looks like bark paper, wrapped in dried banana leaves. You keep it near your telescope, though no one else can quite make sense of it. Visitors become rarer, but letters increase. Scrolls wrapped in embroidered fabric, notes smudged with sea salt, a packet of dried figs with star positions inked directly onto the skin. People write from places you've never been. Damascus, Zanzibar, Samarkand, Lahore. One girl signs her letter, apprentice of the lychee star. Another includes a drawing of a goose she's convinced is a constellation. It's mostly just a scribble, but you include it anyway. You call it the sleeping goose and pair it with dates soaked in cinnamon. You begin to notice a pattern. Most of your correspondents are young, or old, or tucked into the corners of society, people who never quite fit the trim lines of academic astronomy. They're herbalists, innkeepers, midwives, monks, and one anonymous boy who says only, "I draw stars on the roof of my shed and pretend they're mine." You begin collecting these letters. You keep them in a cedar chest next to the observatory's main window, tied with string and sorted by constellation. You call it the Sky Correspondence. Kamran jokes that someday someone will find it and think it's scripture. You reply, "It is. Just written by different prophets." There's a moment, one soft spring evening, when you sit in the courtyard with Roya and ask, half drowsy, what her favorite fruit star is. She picks sour cherry, a minor star in your map of Libra. "Why?" you ask. She shrugs, "Because you said it tastes like memory." And you realize, somewhere along the way, this stopped being just astronomy. It became something else. Not a science, not a story, a practice. Like tea brewing, or embroidery, or prayer. Something done not to prove, but to feel. Historians still debate, by the way, whether your taste atlas was ever taken seriously by the wider scientific community. Some say it was dismissed as fanciful nonsense. Others claim it was quietly admired, its metaphors borrowed in secret. There's even a theory that the 17th century astronomer, Johannes Hevelius, owned a copy, disguised as a book of culinary poetry. No one's sure. You're not bothered. You're busy teaching Roya how to make sky ink, a blend of crushed berries, lamp soot, and something that smells like nutmeg. Outside, the stars are gathering. Tonight, you'll chart a new pattern. 3 stars near the heel of Pegasus that look unmistakably like a fig cut open. You don't have a name yet, but you're thinking, autumn's first slice. The dawn comes softly, barely brushing the horizon with a pale wash of apricot and lavender. You sit quietly at the edge of the observatory garden, the grass still damp with night's breath, cradling a steaming cup of cardamom tea. The air is cool and fragrant, carrying whispers of jasmine and the faint salt of a distant sea breeze. You think about the maps you've been crafting, delicate constellations stitched with ink and imagination, where stars bloom like figs and cherries, and the sky tastes like a fragrant orchard in full bloom. It is a world of softness, where the night's vastness is made intimate by the familiar shapes of fruit, by the sweetness of memory and scent. The truth is, you never set out to be famous. You simply love to watch the stars, to trace their paths, and give them names that felt like secret gifts, like quiet poems. When your patrons asked for celestial charts and practical guides, you gave them the cold mathematics. But for yourself, and for those few who dared to dream differently, you offered a sky painted with flavor and warmth. There's a strange satisfaction in naming something as vast as the heavens after the small, earthly pleasures you know. The apricot star, the pomegranate cluster, the honeydew moon. These are anchors in a sky that can feel distant and lonely. You remember the nights when you whispered these names to the wind, as if calling out to old friends. One evening, as the sun slips behind the mountains, you receive a letter wrapped in saffron-dyed silk. The sender is a botanist from Nishapur who has been following your work from afar. She writes about a rare fruit tree that grows only in the highlands, its blossoms shimmering under the same constellations you've named. Her words bloom like wildflowers on the page, and you imagine her tending those trees, watching the stars from a terrace draped in vines. There is something tender in this exchange, something that feels like the gentle unfolding of a shared secret across time and space. Historians later wonder whether your naming of stars after fruits was more than metaphor, whether it was a coded language for a network of scholars, herbalists, and poets who communicated under the cloak of night. They debate if the names carried hidden meanings, lessons passed quietly from one generation to the next. You, however, are content to leave some mysteries untouched, like the soft curve of a ripe peach waiting to be bitten into. After all, not everything must be explained. Some things are meant to be savored. As the crescent moon rises, you walk back to the observatory, the scent of cardamom lingering in the cool air. You pause to look up, tracing the familiar shapes of your fruit stars glowing softly overhead. They twinkle not just as points of light, but as invitations to dream, to remember, to taste the sweetness of the night. The day unfolds slowly, the sun casting gentle shadows through latticed windows as you prepare your instruments for another night of celestial watching. Your hands move with quiet purpose, dusting off brass telescopes and arranging parchment scrolls beside a small, flickering oil lamp. The air smells faintly of beeswax and dried herbs, a comforting mix that lulls you into a steady rhythm. You recall a particular evening when a traveling scholar arrived, carrying an ancient manuscript filled with star charts from a faraway land. He marveled at your fruit-named constellations, claiming that in his homeland, stars were named after animals and legendary heroes instead. There's a subtle humor in this, how different cultures choose to sketch the same night sky with such varied strokes. You invite him to stay for tea, the steam curling upward like the tail of a comet. As you share your work, you notice how your quiet passion for the stars ignites a gentle curiosity in his eyes. It's a reminder that even across borders and languages, there's a universal longing to understand the cosmos, an unspoken language that binds all who look upward. In your solitude, you sometimes wonder about the stars you cannot see, hidden beyond the horizon or cloaked in the glow of the city. You imagine those distant lights, perhaps named after songs, spices, or forgotten tales. The universe feels like an endless storybook, its pages fluttering softly in the night breeze. One night, while observing the sky through your telescope, you spot a faint, shimmering light blinking rhythmically, an anomaly that puzzles even you. Some scholars later speculate whether this could have been an early sighting of a variable star or perhaps a distant planet. You make a note in your journal, but choose to leave the mystery unpursued, content with the quiet wonder it inspires. There's a softness to your work, a gentle weaving of science and poetry. Your naming of stars after fruits is less a scientific classification and more a tender invitation to savor the night sky as you might a freshly picked fig or a slice of ripe melon. As twilight deepens, you step outside, the cool air wrapping around you like a shawl. The orchard blooms behind the observatory release their sweet scent, mingling with the distant hum of crickets. Above, your fruit stars shimmer like lanterns, each one a small story held in the vast embrace of night. Night deepens like a slow breath, the orchard's gentle rustling fading into a hush as you sit beneath the great canopy of your fruit-named stars. The sky stretches endlessly above you, an ancient tapestry embroidered with soft russet, honeyed gold, and the faintest blush of teal, a quiet cosmos that feels both vast and intimately near. You cradle your journal, its pages worn and scented faintly with spice, as you trace the delicate sketches of the apricot, pomegranate, and fig stars. Each name is a gentle echo of the earth below, a tender bridge between soil and sky. It is in these moments, between waking and sleep, that your heart finds its quietest rhythm, as if the universe itself hums a lullaby, meant only for those who listen deeply. You remember the many nights spent watching the heavens, the flicker of candlelight casting dancing shadows across your notes, the whispered conversations with the wind, and the occasional call of a night bird. There is an irony here. You map the stars to bring order to the sky, yet the cosmos remains beautifully wild, forever inviting mystery. As your eyes grow heavy, you feel the soft pull of rest, the sweet surrender to sleep's gentle embrace. The orchard's fragrance lingers, a comforting promise that even in darkness, there is warmth and light to be found. You let your thoughts drift like the slow fall of autumn leaves, each one a quiet story, settling softly to the ground. The stars continue to twinkle above, their fruit-shaped glow fading slowly into the first light of dawn, as if whispering good night, one last